That's good. Can you hear at the back? Let's also perhaps talk a little bit about choosing a suitable marriage victim, a marriage partner, because how many people here are married already?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So it's too late for you. At least let's talk about the principles of helping your children find the right partners. Can you turn this down a little bit? It's just too much echo. So let's talk a little bit about the principles, the ideology, a bit about Kabbalah and marriage, and then some of the principles behind choosing a suitable partner, helping your children make the right decisions. And I'm happy to take questions. If it's a question about your marriage, just tell me that it's about your friend's problem, and then you don't have to be embarrassed, right? First of all, you know that marriage is a mitzvah, right? I presume you know that. It's a mitzvah to get married. As it happens, it's a man's mitzvah, right? Not a lady's mitzvah. That's very interesting. Men have a mitzvah to get married, not ladies. Why is that? Very interesting. There are many reasons that are given. Some are practical. Some of our commentaries say that the reason a lady does not have a mitzvah to get married is because she has to go through pregnancy and childbirth. That's difficult and painful and dangerous. The Torah would not give a mitzvah for something like that. So she has the choice. That's one idea that's being offered. But there's a deeper approach to this as well. Some time ago, a very talented young lady, exceptionally talented girl. The fact that she's my daughter is just incidental. But she said she wanted to ask my Rabbi a question, Rav Moshe Shapiro. In fact, tonight and today is actually the Yom HaShanah, the Yortzeit of his passing 3 years ago. One of the great minds of the last generation. So she said to me, I'd like to ask him a question. So we went to ask him, and she asked the following two questions. Listen to these interesting questions. She said, question number one, why did God not give me a commandment to marry? I want to do what God wants. If He wants me to marry, He gives me an instruction. But I as a woman have no mitzvah to get married. Why did God not command me? And secondly, why was Eve cursed in an area that's optional? You heard that question? When Adam and Eve were cursed, Adam and Chava were cursed at the beginning of history. The curse was for a woman, difficulty in pregnancy and pain in childbirth. Why would God curse a woman with something that's optional? You hear the question? Moshe, it's a good question. You expect that when humans go wrong at the beginning of their history in the world, the punishment would be something in their essence, not something that's optional. God says to women, your pregnancies will be difficult, you'll have risk and danger in childbirth, but if you don't want to do it, just don't do it. I mean, what sort of curse is that? You hear the question? Anyone? Yes? Speak English? Yes. You Americans, you think you speak English. Anyway, the point is, those were the two questions. Listen to his answer. He said, both your questions are answered with the same principle. Mitzvot are always given in an area of your deficiency. Mitzvot are given where you lack. Mitzvot are not beautiful spiritual activities. Mitzvot are solutions to spiritual problems. The Zohar calls mitzvot eitzot. That means strategies for overcoming difficulties. Every mitzvah is to build something in the world that needs building. You're only given a mitzvah where you need it. For example, no one wants to give their money away to other people. There's a mitzvah to do it. People like to express themselves with no self-control. The Torah says mitzvah to control yourself. Mitzvot are against deficiencies. They're there to build you where you need building. Give you an example. Women are exempt from time-bound mitzvahs. Do you know that? Positive mitzvot, taking a lulav, sitting in a sukkah, wearing tzitzit, tefillin, things that have to be done at a certain time, women are exempt from those mitzvot. Why? The reason is this. Time-bound mitzvot, one of the reasons for such commandments are that they lock you into the time cycle of the world. They discipline you in the time cycle of the world. Women don't need that. They resonate with time. Women's bodies resonate with a time cycle that is so amazing and mysterious that modern medicine has no understanding of it. I'm speaking as a doctor. I can tell you there's not even a theory. You know that all biological cycles in the world fit into day-night cycles, temperature cycles, seasonal changes. The female ovary responds to there's no known physical thing that it corresponds to except the moon. Some women have a cycle that is so regular, it begins on the same date of the Hebrew month. Every month. If it's a long month or a short month, it makes no difference. The ovary knows what the moon's doing. Medicine doesn't even have a theory about that. So women are sensitive to the cycles of time, and therefore they don't need mitzvot that bring them into that area. So the principle is a mitzvah is given in an area where you're deficient. And his answer to her question was this. The reason a woman does not have a mitzvah to get married is because she doesn't need to be told. Women understand it naturally. The Torah trusts a woman to understand the depth of the nature of a relationship and its meaning and its potential, and doesn't have to beat her into it and command her to get married. It's not because it's not important, and it's not because she doesn't need to do it. It's because she doesn't need to be told. Is this clear? And therefore, of course, a woman does not have a mitzvah to get married, not because God doesn't want her to, but because he feels he can leave it to her intuition and to her wisdom without commanding her. And of course, Eve was cursed in an area that is essential. The fact that there's no commandment doesn't mean it's not important. Malka, you like that answer?
Yes.
Fantastic. Okay, so the bottom line is it's a man's mitzvah, and he has to find a woman who's willing to help him, right? She has to oblige him, put up with all his nonsense, teach him, raise him, live with him, and if he can find such a woman, then he's very fortunate. What is involved? So first of all, the important thing to know from a spiritual point of view is that marriage is a reconstitution of an original oneness, according to Kabbalah. Rabbi, are we allowed to talk about Kabbalah? Can we talk about Kabbalah? According to Kabbalah, husband and wife are fused before they're born. They're fused at the back, right? Two fronts, one fused body with two fronts and no back. Again, according to Kabbalah, the back is the place of foreignness, otherness, unrecognizability, darkness, excretion. The fallen side, in Hebrew the word achor, which means the back, is the same as acher, which means foreign, strange, other. The front is the face of spirituality. In Hebrew the word for panim, which means the face, is exactly the same word as panim, which means the inside. That's the place of the outside where you see the inside. Of course, the center of that is the eye. The eyes are the place that you see most deeply into the personality. In Hebrew, the word ayin is exactly the same word as a spring of water, where the hidden water comes to revelation. An ayin, a ma'ayan. So the front is the side of kedusha, of spirituality, and the back is the side of darkness. And husband and wife in the spiritual world, they're fused at the back. There's no back, there's only two fronts. The beauty of that is only a spiritual presence. The downside is no relationship. You can't see each other. And then they're torn apart and brought down to the world to find each other and to relate face to face and bond in a relationship that rebuilds the oneness that they had before for free, this time through their own effort. I don't know what Sfaradim call this. We Ashkenazim call this Bashet. Bashet's a Yiddish word that means the one who's destined for you, or the one who's kind of...
Nasib.
What do you call it?
Nasib. Nasib.
Nasib. Good, there you are. That's it. Okay. So you just learned a new Yiddish word. That is the concept of another half of your soul that is once part of you. The Gemara says that the reason you long to marry is you're longing for the part of yourself that you lost. You know, you can only long for something that you once knew. You can't long for something that's got nothing to do with you. The only reason you long for something is because it was once part of you and you lost it. Do you know what's interesting? Torah wisdom is also called your wife. The Gemara says, Al tikri morasha, do not call it your inheritance, ela morasat, call it your betrothed. Torah wisdom, when a man studies Torah, it's a form of marriage. Why? Because before birth, the child is taught the whole Torah. The Gemara says that the child in the womb has an angel that teaches him the whole Torah. Then he's born. At the moment of at birth, he's given a cruel blow and he forgets it, and he's born as a little baby who knows nothing. And the purpose of life is to struggle back for that wisdom that you once had for free. That's why when you learn something spiritually true, you don't have a sense of learning, you have a sense of recognition. You say, I know that's true. How do you know it's true? Because it's resonating with your own intuitive, deep inner wisdom. So you long for the Torah that you're missing, just like you long for the woman or the marital partner that you're missing. And that's why, since tonight is very special in terms of my teacher of Shapira, let me tell you something very beautiful that he said. The original Jewish marriage, Abraham and Sarah, as they traveled from Israel to Egypt, which means traveling from the land of marital purity to the land of marital impurity. Israel is a place of holiness. Israel is a place that hates immorality. And Egypt is the most immoral place on earth, right? The Torah calls it ervat haaretz, the nakedness of the land, where they'll kill a man to take his wife if she's beautiful. So as they travel from the zone of marriage kedusha to the zone of marriage contamination, as they cross the border, he turns to his wife and he says, please tell them you're my sister. What does it mean? You know the story, right? Torah is never talking simple practicalities. The depth is that every man should think of his wife as his sister. What are brother and sister? They're two separate people who have a common origin. What are husband and wife? They're two separate people who have a common origin. They were once one in the spiritual world. Husband and wife are like brother and sister. In the original world, when Adam and Eve were in the world, only brothers married sisters. That's all there was. That's called Olam Chesed Yibaneh. There was no one else to marry. That was originally the perfect marriage. Today we can't do it. That's another discussion. But that is, marriage is a reconstitution. By the way, if you have a sensitive ear, the Torah calls Abraham our little sister. Shir Ashurim, Achot lanu ketana. We have a little sister. The Midrash says that's Abraham Avinu. Why? Because he's stitched together. The word ach in Hebrew means to stitch. If you have a garment that's torn, when you stitch it together, it's called la'acher, ichui. Brother, sister means to stitch. These are two people who have a common bond. They stitch together. They have a common origin. And Abraham was the one who stitched together a torn world. He found a world of spirituality and physicality that had been torn apart. And he said the deepest obsession of Jews is to make oneness. Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. And therefore he taught that we have to operate in the material world to make it spiritual. What do we call that? Mitzvot. What is a mitzvah? It's a physical action that expresses spirituality. In Hebrew, the word mitzvah means to connect. And therefore, he was the one who stitched together a torn world. Husband and wife are restitching together a deep oneness. By the way, this is why you cannot marry a non-Jew. Not because you can't have a wonderful relationship with, of course you can have a wonderful relationship, but they're not from the same point of origin. These are not two halves of the same soul. It's just like two men cannot marry each other. Why? Two men can have a wonderful relationship. The Gemara says two men can have a deeper love than a man and a woman. But you can't marry, two men cannot marry, because they're on opposite sides of the same coin. They weren't once one as male and female bonded in the spiritual world. So that's the background to marriage, that's the mitzvah. It's looking for that other half of your own soul, so to speak. And it's a bonding that builds that original connection. That's the mitzvah of marriage. Let's talk a little bit about selecting a marriage partner. And as we do that, perhaps we'll talk about some of the rules of marriage. I'm sure there's no one here with any marital tension or difficulty, so we can skip that. We'll just talk about the theory. But how do you guide your child who's coming of age to choose a suitable partner? So there's some rules that are important to know. And it's very important to have this clear, because as the world progresses, this wisdom and this knowledge is breaking down. In your parents' generation, your grandparents' generation, relationships were much more naturally healthy. Today there are tremendous distractions, there's a lot of superficiality, old traditional wisdom has been lost. I don't know about your community, but in most of the Jewish world today, the divorce rate is climbing rapidly. In California, they're quoted as 2 out of 3 marriages, and that's where not many people get married in the first place. So marriage is in trouble. And one of the keys to marriage is making the right selection. And after that, there are very important rules. But let me share with you some insight into the selection of a marriage partner. And again, if you're married already, we need to pay attention to the rules and guidance. Some of you, no doubt, work with young people. Some of you may be rabbis or teachers or guides or counselors, parents, grandparents. How do you guide young people when they look to you for advice about marriage? So first of all, I would say there are 2 non-negotiable criteria, right? 2 non-negotiables. In choosing a marriage partner, there are 2 things that are not negotiable. Let's make a red line and put above the red line the 2 things that are essential. Below the red line, a whole bunch of negotiables, right? Non-negotiable does not mean not important. It just means it's not essential. Now, it could be very important. For some people, it could be absolute. But they're not universally important. But there are 2 things that are universally important. By the way, when I talk about 2 non-negotiable criteria, I'm assuming that above that are absolute requirements, right? For example, a young man getting married, the person he's considering marrying needs to be female, like I said before, right? These days you have to say this, because there's a lot of confusion about that. But female, got to be Jewish for the reasons that I expressed before, right? So, not only that, there are other requirements too. What about a young person who cannot have children? I happen to have a particular interest in medical halachic material. This is a constant problem that we face. What will a young lady do if she knows she cannot have children? This is not our subject directly, but it's a fascinating area. After all, today we have a rule that we marry only one partner. According to original Torah law, a man could marry many women. Right? According to Kabbalah, again, a man is a multi-potential source of power. You know that when a child is formed, the male gives seed by the billion, and the woman gives one egg only. Maleness is an infinite set of potential, and femaleness is a limited set of the real. The beauty, the Kabbalists tell us that the beauty of the male is that it's endless energy. The curse of the male is its only energy, its only potential. It's hopeful wannabes. The beauty of the female is that she brings birth to the world. But the curse of the female is only this one. The Hebrew word for female is nekeva. What does nekeva mean literally in Hebrew? It means to make specific. To make limited and finite and specific. When Lavan said to Yaakov, Nakva alai scharcha ve'eten, fix your wages and I'll pay you. Give me a number. You can't pay somebody unless there's a specific number to be paid. Clear? Anyone? Imagine someone says to you, quote a number, I'll give you that much money. Say any number you want. This is male. More. While this is happening, it's very exciting, but you get nothing. Sooner or later, you have to say a number. The moment you say a number, two things happen. Number one, you get paid. Number two, not 1 cent more. For payment to take place in the world, there has to be a specified number. The male is this hopeless, expanding sense of potentiality. The female is the limited, finite, specific reality in the world. And therefore, theoretically, a man could marry many women. What woman in her right mind would want more than one husband? One's usually, more than enough to deal with and to manage. So, if we marry only one nowadays, and by the way, gentlemen, the reason we're only allowed to marry one, again, in the Sephardi world, this law was never really made. In the Ashkenazi world, 1,000 years ago, a rule was made that a man can marry only one woman. The reason is we were not considered man enough to give love and intensity and devotion enough even for one woman, let alone for more. No doubt Sephardi men have what it takes. But, the point is that's the rule. Now, if you can only marry one, what happens if she cannot have children? Because there are two mitzvot of marriage. One is to be together, and one is to have children. So that leads to a whole fascinating area. Some people who have particular interest in this, you're welcome to. You can contact. I'm happy to. You can reach out to me, and I'm happy to help you in this area. But that is a challenge that we find today. One of the solutions, of course, again, I'm not going to sidetrack into this just for a moment. One of the solutions we have today is, let's say a woman knows she cannot have children. I'll give you an example. A young girl came to see me some time ago. She said, I was born without ovaries. I have a womb, a uterus, I can carry pregnancy, but I cannot conceive. Is it permissible for me to marry a young man and tell him that we'll take an egg from another woman? He'll fertilize the egg, I'll carry the pregnancy. If you say it's okay, that's wonderful. But Rabbi, if you tell me it's not okay, who's going to marry me? Right? Very tragic situation. We don't encourage this for many reasons. I wouldn't say it's forbidden. There are many rabbis who allow it. But the question is, when you do take an egg from another woman, and this woman carries the pregnancy, who's the mother? Who's the mother? Is it the woman who gave the egg, or the woman who carried the pregnancy? Most rabbis, including in the Sephardi world, feel that the genetic mother is the real mother, the one who gave the egg. But there's doubt about this, and all the great rabbis of the generation feel that there's enough doubt that we have to take both sides seriously. Now, for example, when the pregnancy mother is not Jewish, very often what happens is I have a friend whose wife is too ill to become pregnant, so they took an egg from her and paid a non-Jewish lady to carry the pregnancy. When the child was born, they paid her, she gave the baby back to the family. Now here's the question. The mother who gave the egg is Jewish. The mother who gave birth to the child is not Jewish. Is this baby Jewish or not? So what we do is the baby is put through a doubtful conversion. Okay? And in fact, in London, where I live now, the Bet Din does not give a certificate of conversion. They simply give a certificate of what they did. When the child's 20 years old, they want to get married, you can figure out then, you know, what you're going to do. But there's some interesting questions. If the child's a boy, you see the rabbi knows what's coming. If the child's a boy, what happens 8 days later at the Brit Milah? Here's this little baby, 100 people standing around. The people around don't know that this child was conceived in such circumstances. The Mohel's about to do the Brit Milah. Now, if the child's Jewish, he does a normal Brit Milah with a normal bracha. If the child's not Jewish, then this Brit Milah is a Brit L'Shem Gerut. In other words, this will be a conversion. And you make a different bracha. Now, if he makes the wrong bracha, everybody will know it's very embarrassing. Well, what's he going to do? So the Mo'alim have been told to mumble. Mumble. Say the bracha quickly and nobody listens to what you're saying. Now, these are the kind of problems that we're encountering. But that's one of the issues. There's a famous surgeon in St. Louis, Missouri, a Jewish surgeon actually, he's a famous fertility surgeon. He has 5 sets of identical twin women. Okay, 5 pairs of identical twins. Now, you know with identical twins, you can transplant tissue from one to the other with no rejection. Right, you're aware of that? The first kidney transplant was done in 1954 from one Jewish girl to her sister in Toronto. The doctor won a Nobel Prize. There was no rejection because they're identical twins. The girl who received the kidney from her sister died about 2 years ago, 1954. She lived until then. So what's the surgeon done? He's got 5 sets of identical twin girls, where one of the girls cannot have children, she has no eggs, and the other one has eggs. So what's he done? He's cut out a piece of ovary from the fertile twin, and with eggs in, and transplanted it into the ovary of her sister. And all 5 now have children. Now, who's the mother? Who's the mother? Twin A gave birth to the babies, but the eggs came from twin B. The kids look exactly like their mother and their aunt. Okay? They got the same genes. Okay, this is what's happening today, and so this is the brave new world of genetics, and these are some of the issues. But let's assume that we're talking about a couple where there's no known problem with fertility, and they are Jewish, and those absolutes are in place. So now they're dating each other, and what are the criteria that they need to establish? First requirement, the first thing to look at when a young couple is considering each other for marriage, what would you say? You tell me. What do you think is the first thing to look at? I think the first thing is natural attraction. Somebody said chemistry, I think that's right. I won't say that's most important, but it's important. The Talmud says actually that it's more important to men. Why? Because men are more superficial. They get stuck at that level more often. The Talmud says that for a man, he should not marry a woman without seeing her first, in case when he sees her, he has trouble being close to her and then he might not be able to fulfill the mitzvah of loving someone else like yourself. Women are more mature about relationships, and even if the physicality is not ideal, they have the depth of appreciation, but even then it's important. It can be very important. Here's an example. Some years ago, I had a knock at my door one Motzei Shabbat. It's a young lady standing there, trembling, tense. She has to speak to me. Came into my house. She told me, I'm getting married in 8 days' time. Tomorrow, a week. Thank you very much. Thanks. I'm getting married in 8 days' time, and the young man, whom I admire greatly, I've now come to realize I don't find him attractive at all. In fact, I find him a little bit defensive. Why did she get engaged to him? I actually knew him, he's a wonderful young man. But she feels, I'm not sure I could actually be physically close to him. What should I do? I said to her, you sit here and you make a decision now. You either decide you're going through this and you never look back, or you call it off now. She sat there for half an hour shaking and sweating and finally made a decision to go through with it. They got married, they got divorced on their wedding night. She was unable to go home with him. That's where the marriage ended. Not good. So it needs to be a mutual attraction. By the way, if you are married already, you need to pay attention to your looks as well. You can't start changing shape, after you get married. That's not respectful, right? Here's a young man, he's 18 years old, he's dating. You know he's dating because for the first time in 18 years he's wearing a clean shirt and smelling like a flower. And then, after marriage he starts looking a bit disheveled, and that's not respectful. If you make yourself look good when you're dating, you have to make yourself look good after it as well. One of the great rabbis of the previous generation, Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, one of the great Ashkenazi rabbis, 88 years old, he's walking up the steps to his home with a young student, and he starts making himself look neat. So the student says, "Rabbi, do you have guests?" He said, "No, my wife's home." 88 years old, you've got to look good. Right? That's respectful. And women, by the way, ladies, pay attention. When you make yourself look stunning when you're dating, you have to make yourself look stunning when you're married. Some ladies think that their job is to look stunning in the street, and at home they can look like something the cat dragged in. That's not right for a Jewish woman. In the street you should look decent, at home you should look stunning. Right? Those are our values. And therefore, this is very important. That's respectful, and one has to, here's the first rule of marriage, to maintain the dating, romance, and respect right throughout marriage. Complete respect. Gentlemen, do you know you're not allowed to ask your wife to do you a favor unless you know she considers it an act of love? You know that? Yes. You can't ask your wife to take your shoes to be fixed. She's not your servant. Absolutely not. Definitely not. Imagine the president comes to visit you, comes to your home, right, with all the entourage and the TV and all that stuff. When he's leaving, you say, "Mr. President, I know you're going past the dry cleaner. Could you just drop my suit?" Why wouldn't you ask him? He's too important. Your wife's more important. You're only allowed to ask your spouse to do you a favor if you know they consider it a privilege. They're not there to do your work for you. There has to be royal respect. You can never say anything insulting to each other, ever, under no circumstances. No personal criticism ever. You know that, right? How do you criticize your wife, gentlemen? Very carefully. Of course, sometimes it's necessary. How do you do it? Let me give you an example. Man comes home from work, not in a good mood, starving, hasn't eaten since Thursday. And she forgot to make dinner. You know, she warms up some lukewarm cabbage from Shabbat 2 weeks before, forgetting that he's allergic to cabbage. What happens in most homes? The cabbage ends up all over the ceiling. A Jewish husband, eat all the cabbage? Absolutely, she made it for you. You don't say a word. Now after that you've got to say something. She might do it again. Nobody could take that, right? So you wait till she makes your favorite dinner, then you say, "You know what, darling, this is even better than cabbage." See, then she gets the message. That's how you have to criticize, right? It has to be loving. You know, there's a famous story in the Sephardi world. There was a certain place where there was a great rabbi, great chacham, and he visited a family. It was very, very famous chacham. He came with all his students, and the lady of the house was so anxious and so nervous that accidentally she spiced the food twice. Now in that Sephardi community, the spice was already basically lethal. You know, before you give that to an Ashkenazi, I mean, the top of their head blows off. But anyway, then there was an orphan girl living in the home who didn't realize, and she spiced it again. By the time it arrived at the table, it was eating its way through the pot. Anyway, in that community, the custom was that the guest was given first. They passed the pot to him, he served himself, and then he would pass it on. When he served himself, he realized what was happening, so he served himself more. Then he served his students on either side of him, a big helping, and between them they finished the whole thing. No one else at the table got anything. Afterwards, the student said, "Rabbi, what were you doing?" He said, "Imagine how that woman would have felt if people would have realized what the food tasted like." Right? That's the respect you have to show. And therefore, no personal insults. Gentlemen, you're probably not going to enjoy this, but you know there's a mitzvah in marriage called Shana Rishona. You know what that is? That's the mitzvah. Yeah, I see the ladies are smiling. The mitzvah is for the first year of marriage, you're not allowed to do anything other than prove to your wife that she's the most important thing in the world. It has a Torah derivation. The Torah says if a person is the chief of staff of the army and the army needs him and he's just got married, nothing doing, he stays home. It takes a year to convince your wife that you're not taking her for granted. Actually, most modern rabbis say it now takes us 10 years, and some say it never ends. Which means for 1 year, you don't go to work unless she gives you permission. Nothing. You don't leave her side. Not allowed to use the bathroom without her permission. What's the reason, the rationale behind this? The rationale is that women tend to bond very deeply, and men take relationships for granted. And a woman feels that she's being taken for granted. Therefore, it's a husband's job to prove to her that he does not take her for granted, that he loves her intensely and she's the most important thing in his mind. And men usually not like that. If you walk up to a man on the street, ask him if he loves his wife. He'll say absolutely, and he'll buy flowers. But he wasn't thinking about her then. He was thinking about his next $1 million or his next daf yomi. And women do not do that. They bond, and their consciousness is always in that relationship. And therefore, a man has to prove to his wife that she's the most important thing in the world. He has to do that consistently. Gentlemen, you're not allowed to come late without calling ahead. You're going to be 20 minutes late, you call. If you had a very important business meeting, would you call if you were late? Absolutely. Your wife's more important than the most important business meeting. You're never allowed to be where she doesn't know where you are. Harold, I'm not going to get invited again. Right? I'm sure all the men here do this perfectly, no? Don't you? Don't you? If you had an important business meeting and millions of dollars about to change hands and there's a phone call and your wife's on the line, you don't take it and say, I'll call you back, darling. You say, gentlemen, you can all wait, it's my wife. And you say it loud so she can hear. If you do that enough, she'll stop phoning in the middle of the board meetings. The important thing is to show tremendous unconditional respect. You have to realize that your spouse is the most important person in the world. If you're not getting on with your boss, it's serious, but not as serious as not getting on with your spouse. When that breaks, everything breaks. And therefore, marriage is an exercise in tremendous respect. Here's another rule. You never go to bed at night without a peaceful, you never go to bed at night without speaking to each other. At least a chilly good night. It's a very important rule, then things don't build up. Anyway, let's get back to our theme. You're not enjoying this, right? Huh? Let's get back to our theme. The couple are dating, there's natural attraction. Why do we put this as the first criterion? Because it's easiest to assess. I'm not talking about one date. Sometimes a person's deep beauty and their charm grows on you. But if you've met a few times, a couple of weeks, 5 or 6 dates, and there's no chemistry and no connection, that's worrying. It's not the most important thing in marriage, and physical attraction is not the basis of a marriage, but it's important. Love needs to feel good. You don't get married to feel good. That's not marriage, that's business. But it has to feel good too. A job that you're doing has to be enjoyable, otherwise it's not healthy. A marital relationship has to feel good. A relationship with anyone, a friend, there has to be pleasure in the relationship. The pleasure bonds you, even though that's not the purpose of the relationship. And so the chemistry is very important. And so we put it first because it's easiest to assess. By the way, how attractive does the person have to be? Do you have to look at them and get, life-threatening asthma? I would say mild breathlessness at least, a little breathless, I would say above the red line. Red line, neutral. Below the red line, you wouldn't want to be close to this person. Above the red line, you'd like to be close to them. That's what's important. How important? How attractive? There's always somebody more attractive. Age changes you, pregnancy changes you, but it must be an attraction. So it needs to be positive, and young people need to be guided in that area. By the way, if you're a parent or a rabbi or a shadchan or a teacher, it's very important not to push people into relationships that they're not committed to themselves. Some years ago, a young man came to see me. He just got married a few weeks before to a wonderful girl and very attractive girl. My wife and I knew her very well. He walks into my room after about 3 weeks of marriage with a long face. I can't live with her. I said, why not? She doesn't look like my mother. I said, what? He said, I always wanted to marry a girl who looked like my mother. I said, why did you marry her? My rabbi said it would be okay. Okay, they got divorced 6 months later. Not good. So you must not push people. They've got to take responsibility for themselves. They have to make that commitment. You can guide, you can clarify, you can crystallize, you can help them sort out their own thinking, but you can't push them in and say, don't worry, it'll be okay. Unless you know it's just fear. I'll give you one example where I live in London. Some years ago we had a young man who was engaged, and 3 weeks before the wedding he just started getting terrified. There was no doubt she was the right girl. They loved each other, they were eminently suitable, but he was terrified. He was an only child, lived only with his mother, and he was just dreading the thought of having to, he was just afraid. He was lying in bed in a fetal position crying for 8 hours at a time. That was simply a case of fear. The two rabbis, myself and the other rabbi in London, we carried him to the chuppah. We lifted him in the fetal position crying. We held him under the chuppah crying. He stopped crying long enough to put the ring on. Today happily married, they got 8 children, and it's fine. That was just a case of abject fear. But if it's not a case of fear, then they need to take responsibility for themselves. Very important to guide young people in that direction. So that, I would say, is the question of attractiveness and chemistry. And when young people tell you, well, she's wonderful, but there's one feature about her, I'm not so sure, they have to come to terms with it. You can't tell them, don't worry, after you're married, you get used to each other, it'll be okay. Not necessarily. They have to be mature enough to make that decision. Secondly, there's chemistry. What's the next most important thing you need to look at in a marriage partner? Let's say there's natural chemistry, you like each other. What's by far the most important thing? What would you say? Values. Okay, let's talk about values. I would almost put that in the absolute real. If the religious values between you are very different, there'll be tremendous tension. We see this all the time. The place I engage this most often in the Baal Tshuva world, the people who are not raised religious, right? I myself was not raised religious, I was raised normal. I got more involved as time went by. But when we deal with people who started off not religious and become religious, so in that world, there are sometimes confusion about these issues. Sometimes they don't pay attention to the chemistry. They think it's not religious. But I would say that when one of the couple becomes more religious and one less, often there are tremendous tensions. Particularly when after marriage they're married on the same, let's say, level. One gets very inspired about their Judaism, starts to become more observant, and the other one's resentful. That is a recipe for tension in marriages. By the way, again, it's not our subject tonight. What's the solution? No pressure. Love, not pressure. Pressure never made anybody religious. Love. And a little wisdom, right? If you're a woman, don't tell your husband he has to be more religious. Leave a religious book lying around and tell him, darling, this is not for you. A little creativity. Women need to know you can never tell a man what to do. You have to make him think he thought of it himself, right? Then he might do it. Got to deal with the male ego. By the way, once we're criticizing the men, let's criticize the ladies a little bit as well. What's women's most common problem in marriage? They nag. And the problem is they're usually right about what they nag about. That makes it worse. You'll get nowhere nagging. Telling your husband what he has to do and why other people do it better than him, you'll get nowhere. Man walks home, is exhausted, his ego's been bruised, and as he walks through the door, you start complaining and nagging. You'll get nowhere with that. If you're a wise woman, how do you prepare for your husband coming home in the afternoon? You have a bath before he arrives, you make yourself look stunning. You wait at the door for the moment that he walks in with all the children lined up in order of height. In their pajamas. With the dog at the end with his slippers in his mouth. And when he walks through the door, you treat him like a conquering hero, you rub his feet, you massage him, you carry him to his chair, you put him down, you bring him a whiskey. Then you can start nagging after that. You have a little sense how you handle a man. So pressure does not work. People are on different religious levels. You need respect, mutual respect. We see many marriages where there's not identical religious commitment, but a tolerance of each other and respect. Woman wants to cover her hair or do more. Husband has to know what's good for her. Respect. You can make a deal of mutual respect. It's not ideal, but it can work. But pressure doesn't work. Anyway, so now the most important thing, so let's put religious agreement or values, if you like, let's put that up there. But I would say the most important thing after there's chemistry that's been established, the most important thing is what we call midot, character. Character. What is the basic character of the person that you marry? There's nothing more important than that. What you're looking for is a kind, sweet, giving, gentle, basically a normal South African. Then you'll be okay. We're talking about a good personality. If you choose somebody who's twisted, psychopathic, hung up, depressed, then you'll be, unless you're psychopathic and twisted, then you'll be fine. Do you know the story about the sadist and the masochist who got married? A sadist and a masochist got married, right? Ideal, perfect, right? As soon as the door closed, they were alone together. The masochist says to the sadist, "Hurt me." And the sadist said, "No." Okay, that's what you call a perfect marriage. Anyway, the point is that above all else, giving. If two people marry each other and their total focus is making each other happy, it'll be a perfect relationship. Most young people make the mistake of thinking that marriage is a partnership. It's not a partnership. There's a wonderful book that's just been written about this. It's called Not a Partnership. Fantastic book. I highly recommend it. Written by Rabbi Jacobs and Rabbi Lynn in Jerusalem. Very experienced men in this field. Not a partnership. A wonderful book. Marriage is not a partnership. Partners always feel they're doing their share, and why are you not doing your share of the partnership? Some people say that in heaven there's an empty chair. It's always empty. It's called the chair of the happy partner. It's always empty. Marriage is not a partnership. Marriage is your responsibility. Your job is to make her happy. That's all you. If you do it well, she will make you ecstatic. All the focus is to make the other one happy. In every relationship, there's giving and taking. Right? There's left hand and right hand. There's giving and there's holding back. With a child, you need to do both. The child needs to learn. Let's say a word about this. What values do you want your child to gain as a parent? Only two things. Your child needs only two values. Once we're talking about marriage, you might as well talk about education. Your child needs only two values. Consideration and concern. That's all. Consideration means don't interfere. Mother's sleeping, she's not feeling well, don't make a noise. She wakes up with a headache, take her a cup of tea. All relationships require both those characteristics. Your children do not need ballet dancing on horseback and underwater polo and I don't know what you do. What they need is consideration, self-control and love. That's the right and left hands of all relationships. And therefore, children need to learn discipline, tremendously firm discipline, and tremendous expression of love. Parent has to give both of those. But in marriage, all the discipline is on yourself and the love on your partner. And two people doing that for each other, you know, the theory of this is very beautiful to understand. There was a great teacher called Rabbi, and he put it like this. He said, all relationships, all personalities, either giving or taking. You're either a giver or a taker. The divine position is being a giver. God only gives, he can't take. We have an expression in the Talmud, Soneh matanot yichye. Somebody who hates gifts is alive. You love gifts, you're not alive. You're not in the spiritual dimension. You want other people to give you. The spiritual position is giving, not taking. You want to be like God, you become a giver. And therefore in marriage, your function is only to be a giver. Two people marrying each other, each one giving to the other. Perfect. Incidentally, we live in a world that has the opposite value. Listen to this, it's so important to know. Do you know that in the social contract, there are rights and obligations? All social interaction, rights and obligations. The world we live in talks only about rights. The Bill of Rights, the Constitution, the rights to happiness, the rights to free speech. Listen to this. The Jewish constitution called the Torah never mentions a right ever. Only an obligation. Isn't that amazing? The Torah never mentions a right to free speech, a right to your property. Only obligations. Don't steal his property. Give him the freedom. Because when you have a society that focuses on rights, rights are takings. Due to me. Father tells his son, my boy, go out there and fight for your rights. Yeah, you have civil war. The workers don't have enough rights, so they make a union and they fight for their rights. Then the employer makes a national association of employers and you have civil war. You know what the Torah example is? In Torah law, you can own a slave. You can own a slave. You know what your obligation is? You have to treat him like your brother. The slave has to work and you have to treat him like your brother. Imagine the slave comes to his master and he says, Master, you should treat me like your brother. And the master says, you should work like a slave. War. But if the servant works well and the master treats him like his brother, then you have peace. In the social contract, you should be focusing on your obligations. Of course there are rights. The Talmud is full of them. But our focus in our constitution is obligations. You enter a relationship worrying about your rights, you have civil war. Worrying about your obligations, how can I make you happy? And she's trying to make you happy. It'll be a wonderful relationship. And therefore you're looking for good character. Young people say to me, Rabbi, I have to marry somebody with a sense of humor. That's not the most important thing. We have to be compatible in our tastes. Who cares about that? Who cares you like peaceful Bach music and she likes purple underground noise? Who cares? As long as there's mutual respect. The best marriage I ever saw was two people who are completely and utterly opposite in everything. The husband, in this particular marriage, was an amazingly methodical, meticulously logical engineer. And my mother-in-law, I mean the woman, was completely emotional, artistic type. They had the most amazing relationship, total respect. The bedroom door was always closed. The children knew that's a zone of privacy. They come each for the other like king and queen. The children in that family tell me they never saw a personal argument ever. You can have an argument about an issue, argue with your wife about Southeast Asian political, by all means, but nothing personal. And therefore, you don't have to be compatible in terms of the same tastes, as long as there's mutual respect. And therefore, the most important thing about the person your child is marrying is character. In some communities, they think it is family. In other words, if you're Iranian and you marry an Iraqi, that's like, that's marrying out, That's wrong. By the way, do you know that when a child marries, the choice of a marriage partner is one of the few things you're allowed to disobey a parent for? Do you know that? Do you know it's a mitzvah to obey your parents? You know that, right? There are 3 things you can disobey a parent for. Number 1, to live in Israel. Number 2, to study Torah. And number 3, whom you choose to marry. Because a parent, your father's no right to tell you whom to marry. You have to live with her, not him. The only time parents can block a marriage is when the child wants to marry somebody who's a disgrace to the family. Disgrace to the family doesn't mean that they're not Syrian, I know it's serious, but it's not a disgrace. Ashkenazi, Sephardi. They've got to be a criminal or somebody completely disgraced. Then you can put your foot down, because then it affects the family. Disgrace to the family. Otherwise, they can disobey. But they have to make the choice. And the most important thing, yes, family is important. In-laws, by the way, can destroy marriages. In-laws, they're so unwise. Don't interfere. And when you get married, don't go complain to your mother about him. Then she takes your side and the whole family is erupting in war. You should not live within walking distance of your parents or her parents. Am I saying the wrong thing? Moshe, you've got to help me here. You've got to guide me. Anyway, wise in-laws do not interfere. You just help and guide. You don't take sides. You don't make a battle and a tension between them. Now, how do you know that the person has the right character? We said character, midot, the most important. How do you know? So number 1, what's the person's history? Do they have long-term loyal friendships? Kind and good relationships? That's very important. Secondly, what's the family background? Go and visit a young man you're dating. Go visit the girl. Meet her parents. Walk into the home and see what it's like. If you walk into a home and it's peaceful, there's soft music playing, the parents are still married over many years, that's wonderful. But if there's blood on the walls and human bones, also, how does the young man function under pressure? You need to date enough time to get a feel for who he is. Dating is very artificial. You need to put in a little bit of pressure. When he comes to visit, get your kid brother to spill hot soup in his lap. Get the dog to bite him, close the door on his fingers occasionally. See how he reacts under pressure. There was a case in Brooklyn some time ago where there was a young man. He was going for his first date that night, so he went to pray Arvit first. It was very, very tense and anxious. After the Arvit, he was running out of the shul. An elderly man stopped him. He said, "Young man, I have a painful leg. Could you please just give me a ride?" He said, "I would help you, but tonight I just cannot do that. Please forgive me." And he rushed out to his date. He walks into the girl's home, meets the parents, they're talking, everything's going well. 10 minutes later, the door opens, old man walks in, but the grandfather, right? Oh, shit off, end of relationship. So, you need enough time to get to know the person. Now, how much dating is enough time? So enough time to get to know the person well. 3 dates is not enough. Okay, depends on your social, cultural background. But for people with a secular background, you need to get to know the person to know. I'll give you a rule of thumb. How long should you date? Until you know that one more date will not give you new information about the person. When I turn to anyone in this room and I say, Tell me what your father would say in, I give you some situation. You know what he'd say, you know the person. When you get to know someone well enough that you know what their responses are in all kinds of situations, then you know them well enough. That's the time to cut or get engaged. All you're doing by prolonging it is prolonging the pain. Is this clear? You can't get engaged before you know them. You can't get engaged, then discover you want 25 children and she wants to get sterilized. By the way, I know a family with 22 children. Isn't that amazing? They had 21 children, this woman, and her oldest daughter was married and unable to have her own children. So she came to her mother and she said, Ima, listen, you've got 21 children, I have none. Please let me take my youngest brother and raise him as my own. The mother said, take him, I'll have another one. And she had a 22nd. That's the Rieti family, you know Jonathan Rieti? Yeah. Oh. Yeah. The grandparents. Anyway, I give you all a bracha. You should have 22 healthy children. Okay, so you need to know the person long enough to know the personality. If you come from a cultural background where that's not necessary, I'll tell you a story. Harold, am I speaking too long?
No.
Here, I'll tell you a story about a family that was raised in Geula in Yerushalayim. I'm talking about an old Yerushalmi Hasidic family. You know, where there's no contact, male and female at all. Okay, that environment. So this man told us how he got married. He said one day his father walked in Yiddish, he said to him, Nahum, put on your Shabbat clothes. He said, why? Abba, his father said, never mind. So he got dressed in his Shabbat outfit. His father walked him across from Geula into a house in Meir Sharim. And he said to him, say hello to your kala. So he said hello, and everybody said, Mazal Tov. The men had a party in one room, the women had a party in another room. On the way out, his father said, say goodbye to your kala. He said goodbye. He said, not her. Oh, he said no. The next time they met was under the chuppah. They met, they proved, there were no comparisons, never dated anyone before. They saw each other, they agreed. Actually, what happened in that marriage was, they were married for a couple of years, unable to have children. They went to see the great rabbi, the Chazon Ish. He gave them a bracha for chai banim chaim, that they should have 18 living children, and they had 19. Anyway, the point is that if you come from that sort of social background, then that's fine. But if you come from a secular background, I'll give you another example. A young man walks into my office some years ago, said to me, Rabbi, I'm getting married in 3 months and I'm very anxious. Because I wasn't raised religious and I've had many intimate relationships with women. In fact, to this point, I've had 138. He's been counting. And I'm worried that this girl will not live up to my best memories of all those relationships. Yeah, that's a problem. Anyway, they're happily married, they've got a whole bunch of children, but so it depends on your social background and social circumstances. Okay, so what have we said? Red line. Above the red line, natural attraction, that's the first thing to establish. Secondly, what's the quality of the person? What comes through is good, kind, midot, from a loving family, a person who knows how to give, above all else. At 3 o'clock in the morning when money's tight and you're in pain, that's what shines through. Not your taste in music and your... Cultural things are important, by the way. Cultural things are important. We see, for example, a South African boy, Australian, English boy, if he marries a very privileged girl from New York, let's say, with very feminist ideas, there can be tension. Or a young American boy, for example, marrying a girl with an Israeli secular background. You know, they're very assertive. How do you handle a girl who's got a submachine gun? You know. So there are cultural... Americans or British or South African boys marrying a girl from a very traditional Sephardi family often works amazingly, because Sephardi women often understand what it means to be feminine and not conflict with. They're often strong and run the home very well, but they don't conflict with a man's ego. European women, Spanish, South American women, they often understand that very well. It's in the culture. So there are cultures we've seen that work better and some that are more difficult. But those are very general rules. And finally, there's a red line. What's below the red line? Everything else. For example, do you need to marry somebody who's healthy? It's a good idea, but not necessarily. I used to live in a place where I used to see a young couple. She used to get taken off for treatment every couple times a week. After a couple of years, she died. I went to see him. He told me that when they got engaged, she told him she had terminal cancer. She lived for 4 years, and then she died. He said it was the most wonderful 4 years of his life. He's now looking to get married again. Not everybody can do that. It's not an absolute requirement. The family, right? You're dating a young girl. Her mother. What's her mother like? Some young girls come with mothers who are nice. Others come with ones who need a place to park their broom when they visit. You know. No? Is that absolute? No. Some people will say, I have to marry a warm, loving family. Others will say, I'm not marrying her. I'll go live in Alaska without a phone and it'll be okay. How you handle money, that can be critical. The Talmud says when money problems enter, love leaves. The first thing you do before getting married is agree how you'll handle money. Gentlemen, if you have a common account, don't complain when she overspends. That's a problem. Then you have separate accounts, or you have a household account. When the money's over in the month, you say, I'm sorry, darling, that was the agreement. Money tensions can wreck a marriage. By the way, it's very important to know who makes the final decision in a marriage. You know what the halachic rule is? Very interesting. How do you make a decision where there's a disagreement between you? So of course you try to reach a consensus, but if you cannot, you know what the Talmud says? Very interesting. It depends what the decision is. If it's religious, the man makes the final decision. Unless it's a woman's religious area, marital separation laws or kashrut, that's her department and you've got nothing to say about it, gentlemen. You trust her, that's her field. But anything else like this, the Bet Knesset or whatever, then the man makes the final decision. If it's anything practical, she makes the final decision. It's called Mili Deshmaya, that's the husband's responsibility. Mili Da'arva, that means anything practical, it's her decision. She wants green walls with purple spots, you love it. What the house looks like, how the children are dressed, all the practical stuff, that's her department. Once you have a division of responsibility, there's no arguments. And then there's many other things. There's how you, there's styles in marriage, but those are all negotiable items. Anyway, in summary, what we discussed this evening, maybe we'll stop for a few questions. We discussed the theme of choosing a partner, some interesting medical, fascinating elements in the background. We discussed the criteria you need. We discussed some of the rules in marriage, not a partnership. I highly recommend you read that book, Not a Partnership. I have talks online you can download, you can listen to that. There are a few good books on the subject. But marriage is an exercise in total, absolute mutual respect. You do that, you can build an amazing relationship. Who has more responsibility in this area? The woman. Our sages are very clear that a wise woman can perfect almost any relationship. The Talmud tells about two couples who were married, about a couple who was married. They divorced, and each one married someone else. And in both cases, the woman perfected the relationship. Right? A woman can take a rag and make a king out of him, or take a king and make a rag out of him. But it takes wisdom, what we call chokhmah. It takes the wisdom of a woman to understand how to work with a man. She's not bothered by ego in the same way that a man is, usually. And she uses her head and her heart, she can perfect a relationship. And the job for a husband, tremendous respect. She's the most important person in the world, and you need to demonstrate that and show it explicitly all the time. Any questions? Yes?
I have a friend of mine.
Yes, I think I know him. Yes.
I'll talk to you privately.
Any other friends? Questions about children or child raising? Yes, please.
Who makes the final decision on education?
Oh, that's a very important question. I was hoping you would not ask that question. Okay, I'll tell you the rule here. When it comes to children's education, there are two questions. One is general education, one is Jewish education. Okay? So there's no solution here but a mutual agreement. But I'll give you one tip that I think is very important. A young couple marrying should have a rabbi that they trust, that they both trust, that they can talk to. I'm not talking about an extreme rabbi who doesn't understand. I'm talking about somebody who's mature, understands the reality, where they're operating, the family backgrounds, what's realistic for this family, so that he can guide them. If the couple agree, a mutually respected authority, mature, knows them well, that they agree in the beginning that they'll respect his opinion, it's easier when it comes to kashrut and eating in the parents' homes and so forth. Education is much more tense. But if it's a wise, mature person to show them from experience what happens down the line, that's a very important tool that you can use. It's not an absolute solution, but it's very important. The most important thing there is that you think you want more secular education or more religious education. Somebody's got more maturity and has seen kids go through the system and sees the problem down the line. A young, immature couple do not see it so clearly, can benefit tremendously from that wisdom. But I agree with you, that's a difficult question. But I'll tell you an important principle for the child. What's most important is that the child is loving their school. It's a school where they love the child and the child loves being there. If you send your child to a better Jewish education, the child does not enjoy it, there'll be a disaster. You send the kid to a less authentic Jewish education, I'm in favor of the most extreme Jewish education you can find. But if you send a child to one where the teaching is less intense but the child loves it, they'll be a learner. I'd rather my child learns one Mishnah all year and loves it than he learns 1,000 and hates it. Because he'll be a disaster, that child. And therefore the first test, especially I'm talking about junior school, is the child has to thrive, they have to love it, they have to have a lot of self-esteem, they have to love the school, and they have to want to go there. If that's not happening, there's going to be trouble. Yes, any other? Yes.
What forms a deeper connection? The dating of the two rabbis that met, or the rabbi and the wife that met once, or the couple that went on multiple dates and had secular exposure and built a connection throughout all the overcoming all the obstacles.
If I understand your question correctly, what's more important? A long-standing relationship where they really get to know each other with a lot of secular experience in the background, or this naive, Hasidic, there's no question that those are much simpler, much simpler. You're talking about a family where they've been praying in the same bed class for the last 350 years. She knows that he will be just like her father. He knows she'll just be like her mother. There's no comparisons. He's never got no idea what a woman is. He's never been close. Always a tremendous, wouldn't even look at a woman. They don't even put things from hand to hand. There's a certain purity in that. Now the truth is, I'm speaking as a doctor, we see problems in that world. There are intimate problems, and as time goes by and secular values creep in, and they have these, okay? So they're exposed. There's no children hermetically sealed from reality anymore. I don't care how religious. So problems are growing. The divorce rate in the Orthodox world is climbing. It's still a tiny fraction of what it is in the secular world, but it's climbing alarmingly. We're seeing problems. But it's a much simpler and much more straightforward marital relationship where there's no comparisons at all, and clear expectations, and a clear meeting of minds on their goals. Person with many secular relationships in the past, there's a lot of comparisons, there's a lot of memories, there's a lot of, it's complicated. It can be complicated. So I won't give you an absolute rule, but you have to deal with your reality. Yes, please.
I have a question for singles who've been single for a while, let's say, or especially as time goes on. How would you advise people to maximize themselves to literally, basically we don't have a relationship, so we don't have a real relationship yet, because marriage is the real relationship. So to perfect themselves in the most possible way to maximize their time as a single to be ready.
It's a very important and mature question about singles time is passing by, they haven't found the right partner. You've actually answered the question yourself. You said, how do they maximize their own potential, grow maximally? That's a very mature insight. When a young person defines themselves as only marriage material and it's not happening for them, it can be very depressing. And this is a real crisis and a problem in the modern world. So the first key is to build yourself. You need to do things that make you happy, fulfilled, use your tools, use your talents, if it's teaching, whatever it is. It's important for two reasons. First of all, if that's where God is taking you in life, you need to do it well. And secondly, you make yourself the most marriageable person by being happy and thriving and building yourself anyway. Who knows when Hashem will send you that or send this person that partner. It's a very painful reality that we face today. And therefore, the first goal is to be happy and thriving. And the way you are happy when your life has a bitterness is to put yourself into circumstances that make you happy. To sit at home and say, I will be happy. You will not be happy. You will be miserable. But when you do things that draw the happiness out of you, do something for somebody else. Get busy. Start a marriage, shidduch, club. Yeah, absolutely. Also, you need a resource in the community. Somebody's putting together people with a mature vision of who might be good for whom. We need that desperately. I don't know your community, but if there's not an organization like that, it needs to be done. But the key is personal development. Yes. Last question. Yes. Yeah. Speak loud, please.
How important is it, you think, for a person to find a spouse that pleases their parents?
That does what?
Pleases the parents.
Okay, this is a good question. I did try to relate to it somewhat. How important is it to find someone who pleases your parents? Ideally, it's very important. Ideally. First of all, they're probably going to pay for the wedding, right? So you like to have them on side, okay? But when push comes to shove, the person has to please you more than your parents. I mentioned there are 3 things you can disobey a parent for, right? And that is your choice of a marriage partner, because you're going to have to live with the person and not your parents. In traditional families, there are certain communities that have got a very strong community ethic. It can be more important. And there are communities where people are prepared to wreck their child's marriage because they don't approve of the person, or they don't approve of their family, or their ethnic background, or the type of Jew that they are, which is ridiculous, but it does happen. The young person has the strength of character to know that if you can find somebody that's acceptable to your parents, it's much simpler and much better. But if you can't, it's not essential. And therefore, when push comes to shove, you have the strength of character to say, I have to live with this person, and as long as it's a good, suitable person, we're not talking about somebody that's problematic or disgrace to the family, then it may be necessary. I think this is a good question to run by somebody more mature, rabbi in the community, somebody who knows the parents and knows what the tensions are likely to be. I can't give you more than that general outline. Yes, about your friend.
It's a difficult question. I wanted to speak to you personally about it, but if you have resistance in the family, the child is not ready to get married, but you want the joy of having them get married, and you know they're going to be happy if they get married, but there's resistance. It could be psychological, it could be career.
Yes.
How does one dance?
Okay, this is a good question. What happens when a child is not going exactly the way you would like? In this particular respect, old enough to get married and they're resisting it. Okay, so let's talk. If the child's 17 or 18, that's one kind of problem. If they're 35, they meet somebody suitable without letting them know that it was you, the disaster if they know it's you, they'll definitely won't marry them. You have to be a little creative, right? But I think the first issue is diagnosis. What is this young person's problem? Let me say something more general. When a child is not behaving correctly, it could be a 15-year-old who's not living up to their responsibilities, general or Jewish. I'll give you one very important rule for parents. And that is, as a parent, you should enforce with total iron discipline everything that you can get away with. And turn a blind eye to what you cannot. Again, let's say a child is experimenting with drugs or dating somebody who's very unsuitable or whatever it is, okay? Sometimes, or they're rebelling religiously or culturally against your values. Many parents give up at that point and they think they've lost everything and then they start enforcing nothing. That's irresponsible. As a parent, you need to enforce everything you can get away with. Even if it's minimal, you come to dinner with a shirt on, or not stoned, whatever it is. But there's no excuse to give up your discipline altogether. Is this clear? Child's not keeping Shabbat properly, let's say, and you're upset by that. That doesn't mean you drop all responsibility and all discipline. When the child challenges you and they say why, do not give a religious answer. The answer is not because it's right, because God wants it. The answer is because it's my house. You want dinner, you come to dinner with a shirt on, or not stoned or drunk, whatever it is. Otherwise, no shirt, no dinner. You see, if you give religious answers, they will argue with you. By the way, they'll argue with you when they're 3 years old these days. And you will not win an argument with a 3-year-old. They've got much more stamina than you. Right? Don't argue. The argument they cannot answer is, it's my home. When you get married, you can do whatever you want. You can stand on the table and have dinner with whatever you want, right? But not in this house. No shirt, no dinner. In other words, that they cannot argue with. You go to a Japanese house, you take your shoes off. In this house, you do things the way you observe Shabbat in this home, let's say. What you're doing behind closed doors, you're not going to win that battle anyway. When the child's using their phone or whatever it is in their room, and you insist that they don't do it, they're going to disobey you. You're going to lose that battle. All you do is lose authority. But there's no reason to give up on things that you can maintain. Now those things have to be very firm and very clear. And finally, even if you can't win the battle, you need to make your values clear. The child, how many of us look back and say, my parents actually were correct. The values came through. You were too immature to do it at the time. But those values need to be discussed at the Shabbat table. By the way, observing Shabbat correctly, apart from its religious essential nature, it's worth it just for the family value. Let me ask you a question. Please raise your hand if you are part of a family that has dinner together, the whole family, every evening. Look at that, 5 hands. Do you know that your grandparents, your parents, nobody ate dinner until everybody was home? It was unthinkable. I was raised in a family like that, no matter what. We ate together every night. Today, people pass like ships in the night. At least Shabbat, you can sit together as a family. At least that, forget the religious side. Just for marriage, you can sit at the Shabbat table and look into your wife's eyes over the candles and remind yourself of her name. before you fall asleep with your nose in the soup. Shabbat is a time when you sit at the table and children hear your values. They hear your life goals and your life aspirations. You don't talk about, who's buying what and who's got money and who's wearing shoes with the right, thing on it. Which kids like to talk about. And you've got to make it interesting. We in our family, we have really cool riddles that we challenge the kids with and they like to chop. Here's another advice for you. Have guests at your table. You talk to the guests. The kids will listen in. I hear my children giving long religious speeches to people that I never told them. You know why? They heard me getting enthusiastic to some new person at the table and they were listening. But if I gave them a lecture, they would never listen. So visit people who know more than you. Invite people over. Get enthusiastic. You can talk to your children, even when their children are misbehaving terribly. Don't talk at a time when it's an issue. But when things are going well, then you talk about your values. Let them argue and say they don't accept it. But they hear what's important to you. It goes in. A few years down the line, they'll be more mature. And therefore, these things have to come across. The modern world is robbing us of these transmission of values. If I may say one personal word to finish. How many people here are, at least one of your parents is Syrian? At least. Okay, you have an unbelievable tradition. You come from a very, very strong community. A community that had tremendous value. When they came to this country, they made very strict rules about certain things. Tremendous pride in their cultural heritage. Are you making sure your kids get that? In an authentic way. I'm not talking about simple, externalities. I'm talking about the genuine values. The biggest threat you have is a country that's very friendly. The smile is mightier than the sword. When your kids are raised in an assimilationist world where everybody's acceptable, are they getting those values? Never mind Syrian. What about the proud Sephardi values? The Sephardim were not damaged religiously like many of the Ashkenazim. Is that coming across? You need to talk about that. Have events. Bring your kids. Have events that make them tremendously proud of their heritage and their learning and their great personalities of Sephardi history and Jewish history. Moshe, you run programs. I'm sure you do, right? You get the youth in, don't you? Yes? Okay, any last question before we close? Yes, please.
How is it that you can change the cycle of either being introduced to the same type of person or meeting the same type of person on your own? Who's really not for you? How would you...
People trying to get married, not successfully meeting the right kind of person. The best advice I can give is the community needs a resource for that. Somebody who's mature enough to make the right introductions, mature enough to see through the conventions, right? Every community needs that. And if you don't have it, then the community needs to set it up. Anyway, thank you very much.